Craig. Craig did a lot of his power ride and power bottom and power top stuff on me, and I was like, okay, this works very well. I might need to take a more in-depth look at this. And so, especially as of late, I've definitely started trying to work on his power ride.
For
I feel like the
instructors.
Craig one is a nice seasoning because the Craig one has, I'd say, more high-level concepts, like, or more leg work that is awkward for people to do when they don't have flexible hips or just can't use their feet properly.
Remember, your coaches don't know how to control a man because they don't know how to ride a man.
When he's not travelling the world delivering seminars and organising events that stick it to the man, Craig Jones manages to make a pretty good video instructional. After carefully balancing his schedule of teasing the Ryan brothers and making questionable life choices, Craig managed to set aside 4 hours, 9 minutes and 5 seconds to film what could end up being his magnum opus, Power Ride, a new philosophy of pinning. But what is this philosophy? How did Craig come up with these ideas? And possibly, most importantly, can we implement these techniques into our own jiu-jitsu systems? There's only one way to find out. So, join me as we embark together on a trip to Jonestown as we explore Craig Jones' Power Ride. To understand how Craig came up with this new philosophy of pinning, it would be handy to reflect on how Craig Jones became the grappler he is today. After starting his career down under and garnering a reputation as a Z-guard triangle machine, Craig started developing his own style by, self-admittedly, stealing a large percentage of Eddie Cummings' game. Craig burst onto the international scene in 2017 after an ADCC win over Leandro Lowe. After establishing himself as a world-class leg locker, Craig found himself facing a problem. As leg locks became more widespread, he would have to start dealing with opponents that were wise to his tricks, either by stalling, countering, or in the curious case of Vinny Magalhaes, simply choosing to believe that leg locks didn't work. After joining the Danaher Death Squad, Craig focused on becoming a more rounded practitioner as preparation for competing under the ADCC rule set. To achieve this, Craig would begin focusing on a more assertive style of top pressure, similar to other members of the team. John Danaher is known for being unafraid to take what works from other sports, whether it be wrestling, judo, or any other grappling style. If it works, it works. It's fair to say that Craig had a similar methodology of technique selection even before he started working with John. After being drafted as coach on The Ultimate Fighter and by working with MMA fighters, we see the possible beginnings of where Craig began to formalise his ideas on true pinning and true control. By being placed in an MMA rule set where traditional jiu-jitsu points don't matter, Craig would summarise the philosophy of Power Ride in a single sentence. Points do not equal control. In fact, Modern MMA matches seldom finish in what Jiu-Jitsu considers traditional ground and pound positions. Historically, this source of contention is one of the many issues that led to the split of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, with the former being focused on self-defense and combat application, as opposed to the latter's desire for sporting competition. It's unclear whether Craig developed his skepticism of points before or after working with MMA athletes, but there is something hilarious about Craig Jones being the potential saviour of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. But if the traditional positions aren't the best positions for control, what are the best positions? What's wrong with mount? Side control? You're telling me 2 hooks on the back is bad? If we remove the concept of scoring points and of pre-existing ideas of controlling positions, we can ask ourselves a deeper question. What is true control? For a grappling context, it doesn't have to be a specific position. If we can pin the opponent in a position where they cannot move, well, we're in control. If we can force the opponent into only making bad choices, we're in control. If the opponent, using all their power, cannot escape and are helpless to defend our submissions, well, we're in control. In Volume 1 of the series, Craig discusses how movement is created and how power is generated. Craig contends that removing the opponent's ability to move and create power is true control. So let's try to examine his reasoning. Most escaping movements in Jiu-Jitsu involve some form of bridge or shrimp action. In order to do these movements, the bottom athlete must utilise their feet on the floor. By removing an opponent's feet connections to the floor, this severely limits their ability to generate power. In all of the traditional pins of Jiu-Jitsu, mount, side control, and even some back positions, the opponent can easily place both feet on the floor. Craig suggests, admittedly without evidence, that before Jiu-Jitsu split into Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Sport Jiu-Jitsu, the original back position was to have your opponent belly down, rather than these spectacular style back takes we're accustomed to seeing in modern grappling. If the original point scoring system is based on our ability to strike our opponent, then this certainly lends some credibility to the theory. Thankfully, many of the old Gracie challenge videos have managed to find their way online, and sure enough, with a little digging, we can see that many of the matches do indeed end with a belly down rear mount position. If you're unfamiliar with the Gracie challenges, as a bid to promote the effectiveness of Jiu-Jitsu, the Gracies would allow outsiders to challenge them to one-on-one fights. The Gracies needed a more marketable way to promote their style across the US, so it ended up creating a small event called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Goodbye Gracie Challenge, hello MMA. It's been a long time since the UFC was first blessed onto our screens, but sadly, traditional Jiu-Jitsu has become a much smaller aspect of the sport than it is currently. A heavier emphasis has been placed on other grappling arts, like wrestling, leaving traditional Jiu-Jitsu pins to be less common. Randy Couture stated he preferred to initiate strikes from half guard top. Greg Jackson told George St. Pierre to explicitly not pass Dan Hardy's guard and deny Hardy the ability to use his hips. Derek Lewis would, well, do what he wants. Instead of passing our opponent's legs to our more traditional Jiu-Jitsu positions, far greater control can be exerted by staying on top of the legs instead. In Volume 2 of the series, Craig offers some lower body control ideas for us to reduce our opponent's athleticism and keep us on top of the fight. The lower body controls we can utilise all have a specific goal in mind as far as pinning our opponent goes. If our opponent wants their feet on the floor to generate power, our goal should be to take that away. The first idea Craig presents is the idea of splitting the legs. The more you split the opponent's legs, the more uncomfortable they'll be. Instead of rushing to a pass, we can instead maximise our opponent's discomfort by keeping them in a split position. For an example of how this may play out, an excellent example of someone we can study is BJ Penn. When passing his opponent's guards, BJ would utilise what is sometimes referred to as the dope mount position. If you've ever been caught in this, then you too will know how limited some of the options are to escape become. While splitting the legs offers a great principle we can follow, Craig's next idea gives us some practical uses. If we have trouble increasing the split of an opponent's legs, leg rides are available. It is in my opinion that riding the legs is the most fruitful of the lower body controls that Craig suggests. By maximising our weight over our opponent's knees, we can keep our opponent on their side. Conceptually, this was something I was able to put into my game almost immediately and see results. Gordon Ryan presents some ideas of leg riding and leg staples in his instructional series, notably systematically attacking the guard and systematically attacking from top pins mount. However, it never did click what I was supposed to be trying to achieve with them. With Craig taking a more conceptual approach in his series, this was something that I was finally able to get to click for me. In spite of Gordon and Craig not being best friends, their instructional content and control ideas complement each other very well. In fact, if anyone is looking to specifically focus on improving their leg riding prowess, Gordon's match against Patrick Guido is a great starting point. Gordon is well known for using his long time limit matches to wear his opponents out, and in this case there is no exception. What sets this match apart from the others is the various power ride examples that are so much more noticeable. After introducing us to the leg split and leg ride, Craig moves on to his next idea, the Turk. The Turk is a popular move from American folk style wrestling. Rather than a single technique, the term Turk refers to a family of techniques designed to create back exposure. Turks are useful when the opponent is trying to stand up, something that ADCC and MMA rule sets encourage the athletes to do. By forcing internal rotation on one of our opponent's hips, we can force Turks from top half guard, turtle, and scramble situations. The final lower body control that Craig introduces is the idea of shelving the opponent's legs. By placing a wedge underneath our opponent's limbs, we can limit their range of motion, or, in the case of power ride, stop them putting feet on the floor. In combination with splitting the legs, BJ Penn would creatively use chair sits as a style of shelf in order to set up guard passes. Perhaps the most famous shelf belongs to Khabib. Instead of mounting his opponents, he would rake their knees together and force an opponent's feet to cross. While he was doing this, he would keep the feet elevated and punch you in the face for good measure. With our legs occupied either splitting, riding, turking, or shelving our opponent's legs, we need something for our hands to be doing. Thankfully, in volume 3 of the series, Craig offers some upper body tools which we can utilise to further control our opponent. The goal of the upper body grips is to combine with our lower body controls and force an opponent to turn belly down. If they refuse, then things will start to get rather uncomfortable for them. The first tool Craig presents is the traditional crossface. Mostly used in conjunction with an underhook, the goal of the crossface is to turn the opponent's jaw and ultimately control their head and shoulders. Through combining the crossface with our leg rides, we can add a spinal twist to work in tandem with the shoulder of justice. Moving on from the crossface, the next tool presented is a claw grip. Especially useful in scrambles, the idea of a claw grip is to reduce our opponent's linear movement. It offers slightly more utility than your typical seatbelt grip. In the context of power ride, it allows us to upgrade to Craig's next control tool, open elbows. If the best defensive position for our opponent is the knee to elbow connection, surely our goal should be to separate our opponent's knees and elbows as far as possible. By separating elbows, we create not only limb extension for submission opportunity, but we prevent the opponent from being able to frame or use his elbows to stand up. The next tool is often considered to be the best grip, and it happens to be my personal favourite, the Dagestani handcuff. We don't see the Dagestani handcuff too often in Jiu-Jitsu, as there is less danger in accepting bottom position when there are no strikes involved. Once the opponent begins to turn belly down and is under pressure to stand up, they usually attempt to build height by basing on their elbow. Anytime the opponent uses their elbow this way, they become vulnerable to being collapsed. If we ever want to encourage or discourage our opponent turning, then the half Nelson becomes a great asset. If the opponent tries to turn belly down, we can stop them. If the opponent tries to turn belly up, we can stop that too. If we ever needed an example, Gordon Ryan was able to utilise the half Nelson to devastating effect in his matches against Jacob Couch and Pedro Mourinho. The final tool which Craig presents is the arm-in crossface. If our opponent ever makes the mistake of bringing their arm across the centre line while we're on top of their legs, the arm-in crossface is available. Stronger than a regular crossface, the added pressure comes from how embarrassing it is to get caught by. Now that we've had a chance to explore some of the upper body and lower body tools available, it'd be useful to go from theory into practice. In fact, it would be very helpful if there was an example of a group of athletes effectively using the power ride style at the highest levels of competition. Fortunately for us, we don't have to look very far. There's always a sense of myth surrounding an undefeated fighter. Khabib and the Dagestani camp definitely seem to have an aura around them. Were they simply winning because they were built different? Or did they know something that we didn't? Countries from the Soviet bloc were always seen to have developed a unique scientific insight into sports, and Khabib's use of broken English only added further intrigue. As I sought to develop my own top game, I looked at athletes like Khabib, and through a jiu-jitsu framework, I couldn't understand their success. I knew that trying to strike from side control top was a bad idea. By giving up arm control, it gives your opponent space to escape. I knew that I wanted to get to better striking positions, such as the crucifix or top half guard. But I was still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. How could athletes like Khabib stay on top so readily while striking with frequency? For me, that missing puzzle piece was Craig Jones's power ride. My mistake was looking at matches through the lens of jiu-jitsu rather than grappling. After watching power ride, it was all clear. What the Dagestanis were doing was not the traditional route of pinning or guard passing, but rather removing the opponent's ability to be athletic. Craig Jones had already met Alexander Volkanovski before Power Ride was recorded. While initially brought into the Volk camp to help prepare against the unorthodox grappling style of Brian Ortega, it's unlikely that Volk had his sights set on Islam Makhachev at this early stage. In fact, at the time of the Ortega match, Makhachev wasn't anywhere near the title. He was scheduled to face Rafael dos Anjos the following month, before dos Anjos was replaced at the last minute by Volkanovski's teammate, Dan Hooker. It's likely that Craig was studying the Dagestani style due to its overwhelming success on the MMA circuit, even before a potential match between Volkanovski and Makhachev was even on the cards. We can observe the power ride style in Khabib's matches, the leg splits against Edson Barboza, the leg rides against Dustin Poirier, the shelf against Conor McGregor. Interestingly enough, even Khabib sometimes struggled to keep some athletes down on the floor. If one of the greatest MMA grapplers had trouble keeping people down, it's fair to assume we might encounter the same problem when we are learning these new skills. Thankfully, Craig offers us some ideas on how to approach this should the scenario occur. As we're learning to control more and more skilled opponents, it becomes more inevitable that they will find ways to turtle and get back to their feet. Jiu-jitsu doesn't work if the opponent stands up, so we need a way of keeping them on the floor to prevent this. Achieving a belly down rear mount would be the ideal situation. Unfortunately, people aren't just going to let us get to such dominant positions. True to the principles of power ride, The goal is to create pinning pressure on our opponent in Turtle and prevent them building height, rather than throwing in 2 hooks and trying to score points. Out of front headlock scenarios, Craig recommends opting for Kosoto hooks and cradles if the opponent tries to post a leg. If we're alongside our opponent, Craig suggests utilising a diagonal ride. From this we can add in ideas of crab hooks, spiral rides and underclaws. A wonderful example of this style of turtle control would be Leon Edwards in his match against Gunnar Nelson. Gunnar was believed to have a significant advantage in the jiu-jitsu department, but with a simple diagonal hook, Leon was able to nullify most of Gunnar's abilities to stand up. If we get the opportunity, we can incorporate what Craig has dubbed rear naked control. It's primitive and yet glorious. Instead of going for a conventional rear naked choke, we can simply use a rear naked style grip across an opponent's forehead to consistently lift the chin. You won't submit the opponent from this, but it is certainly draining having an opponent pull on your neck constantly. Flattening an opponent out is the goal, but some belly down positions are better than others. After spending a stint training under John Danaher, it's safe to assume that his love of hierarchies has rubbed off on Craig. Craig contends that the best position to put the opponent in is with a single reinforced hook with turking pressure. In second place, we see the traditional 2 hooks in. Coming in third, we have a flattened leg ride. Last, but by no means least, would be the combination of 1 traditional hook and 1 crab hook. Volumes 5 and 6 cover entries into power ride from traditional positions along with submissions. If we're being honest, this definitely feels like a second helping of dessert after a fine meal. We've covered the upper body controls and the lower body controls presented. Craig Jones did not invent these moves, and nor does he claim to. Instead, he has organised and packaged them in a way that is presentable and marketable to jiu-jitsu students. A common criticism of the series is that it's just wrestling ideas. This criticism is not without merit. However, I would like to counter that there are many countries and areas of the world that don't have an indigenous wrestling culture and would not see these moves in a traditional martial arts setting. If this is a person's first exposure to these ideas, then it's good on Craig for helping bring those ideas to a wider audience. It's too early to measure how much of an impact, if any, Power Ride has had on the sport of grappling. The legacy of Power Ride will be seen as further proof that good wrestling technique continues to work at the highest level. With events like CJI and UFC Fight Pass Invitationals experimenting with getting rid of traditional point scoring, the next wave of jiu-jitsu athletes, coaches and hobbyists will certainly be looking to incorporate some Power Ride ideas into their game. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and checking out the sponsor of this video, X Martial. If you watch as much jiu-jitsu content as I do, then you will already know who X Martial are. What you may not know is that X Martial is working behind the scenes to support the creators that you know and love. X Martial sent me some products to try, and I'm very pleased with the results. If you need any equipment, then please consider X Martial. They've really helped me out with this one, so I would like to help them. I've put a link in the description. This is a special link, so they will know that you came from my video. There are some really cool designs, and if you can't find anything you like, you can even create your own custom products. If you don't want to buy anything and you just want to support the channel, please feel free to check out my other videos. Cheers.